How's it going, everybody? Hope everyone's having a fantastic day, night, dawn, dusk, or whatever time you're listening or watching to this podcast. I invite you to pull up a chair, sit back, and relax, and welcome you to season 2, episode 20 of the SPMA Council podcast. That's a lot of
That's,
episodes.
that's the big 2-0,
Not a
Will.
big deal. Not a big deal. We've got a great episode lined up for you today, with a great guest. More on that later. But before we get into it, let's meet the co-host. We're bringing the dynamic duo back together for one final time.
We are getting the band back together, my man.
Out of B. Please welcome the current SPMA Council President and the former co-host of the SPMA Council podcast, Ethan Crystal. I don't think you need this big of an introduction, anyways. But what the heck? What's good?
My ego thanks you, my friend. No, but it is so good to be here. I reached out to the podcast team and said I want to do it one more time. A little retirement lap, I guess. And the podcast is something that's kind of, really held a special place for me. Seeing it grow alongside yourself and seeing what you and the team have accomplished this year, getting 20 episodes, getting an amazing theme down, getting an amazing array of guests, getting some fantastic content, some great stories, and some great advice as well. So just to be here, seeing this all kind of come to fruition, one, I'm excited for what season 3 holds next year and what next year team has to do. And two, just reflecting without, kind of getting too into my feelings right now. This is, a great feeling of happiness to me to see where everybody's gone. So my biggest thank yous to Will, Neville, and Evan for all the hard work they've done this year. And my biggest, smiles to everybody and shout out to every single one of you listening right now. Thank 100%. You for all your support of SPMA Council and their initiatives.
Appreciate that. Shout out to all the listeners. We had on a friend of yours from Montreal, Roderick MacKinnon, who currently works as the coordinator of games operations for the Canadian Olympic Committee. Quality episode, Ethan. What were some of your highlights that you took from it?
So two of the biggest takeaways that I hope you can, kind of understand is first off, the way that Roddy thinks is fantastic, and the way his process goes. A lot of what I heard is how he got to a certain place by working backwards. So, you'll hear about his experiences later on, and he mentions briefly about, where he is in his position now, and the way he got that is, thinking about what he wants to do in the future, and then working backwards and getting into where he was now at this point and taking those steps to get there. So I think Roddy has an amazing way of thinking of stuff. That's one thing that really, really resonated well with me. Also, taking into account that he is currently mid-20s, early to mid-20s, and he's experienced so much just in terms of, personal life and professional life in terms of school, exchange, traveling, working, going to across the globe, and doing stuff not related to sport, and then bringing it back around and relating it to sport and to what he's doing now. So those are the two things that really, really resonated with me. Also, very nice to have somebody who I'm connected with on and I have a rapport with and I've known for a while. I tell a story, later on in the episode that you'll hear, but Roddy and I call him a friend and I definitely consider him a friend, but we've only really met in person a handful of times for one reason or another, which is kind of crazy to think of.
100%. That's sort of the reality. That's sort of the reality now with COVID and Zoom meetings up the wazoo. So two insane, great points to consider there. Another one that other thing that stood out with me, and it wasn't really related to sport, was his experience as an exchange student in China. I mean, I'm not trying to plug the theme of the show here. Okay, maybe I am, but but it was that was really an instance where he really got out of his comfort zone, eh?
Can you imagine finding what he said 3 months? He said 3 months. Hey, do you want to go to China? And he said, sure. He had 3 months, didn't know a lick of Mandarin, showing up there, getting help by a student like that. Absolutely, that exemplifies the team getting out of your comfort zone. So glad we had him on because he definitely relates back to what we've tried to accomplish all year with the podcast, and specifically the theme of getting out of your comfort zone.
100%, 100%. I don't want to spoil anything more. So before we head into the show, Ethan, again, pleasure having you on. And
Thank you.
although
Pleasure's all
that,
mine. Thank you.
yeah, and although that we're it's likely that you're gonna be on the season finale. Thank you again for starting this back in January of 2019. If you don't get the idea to start this, then this doesn't happen. And thanks again for taking a chance on a person who had no friggin' clue how to podcast, and showed them the ropes, and here we are. Everything comes back full circle.
Well, I gotta then give my kudos back to past presidents of SPMA Council, past executives who I've gotten to know, and who took a chance on me as coming in as a first year transfer student, and kind of heard me out and heard my ideas. And then shout out to Dr. Kirsty Spence for being that first guest on. It's been a wild journey, and Will, getting you involved was beyond anything I could have ever dreamed of, because Will came up to me, and this is my first time meeting Will. Will came up to me in a meeting and said, "Hey, I'd love to be involved in the podcast." And at this point, I was kind of going off on my exchange to Elliot. Whoa, I just realized something. Without spoiling much, but I was going on my exchange, which opened up an opportunity for you to get experience, almost like this potentially happens later in the episode, where Roddy tells a story about his friend going on exchange, and because of that, him getting an opportunity. Just thought of that. Relaying it back though, none of this would have happened without the support that I received, and that this team has received. So a huge thank you goes out to everybody along the way, and it's a little goodbye on my end, and hopefully to see you soon. Obviously, hopefully getting involved with the season finale, and onwards we'll see what happens. I do have with me one of the original mics. I didn't use it, but I have it with me. There was audio issues, so I couldn't use it today, but I do have it with me. So a little souvenir. But thank you again, Will, for having me on. And
anytime,
to anyone who's listening right now, kudos to you for popping this on today, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Will, I'm gonna send it back to you for any sign off before we get to Rod.
100%, and I think that's just a great way to end that before as we send it off to our guest. We hope everyone enjoys, but let's send it over to Roderick MacKinnon of the Canadian Olympic Committee. All right, for episode 20. Geez, we've done a lot of episodes. I've probably said that one too many times, but whatever, let's roll with it. Our guest today, coming to us from Montreal, Quebec. He is the coordinator of games operations from the Canadian Olympic Committee. Please welcome Roderick MacKinnon. Rod, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How's it going, man?
Thanks for having me, man. I feel kind of like an imposter right now. I don't know what I'll have to share, but I'm excited to get this going.
100%. So, all right, let's get right into it with the de facto first word of the SPMA Council podcast. Rod, what makes your story unique?
Yeah, that's a good one. To be honest, and I think I want to convey that I just came from a very regular background. I wasn't playing high level sports. I didn't have the connections from playing, let's say, AAA hockey or anything like that. And I also didn't come from a sports management program, and so that's a big one. And it meant that I really had to kind of create my own path, and kind of take the initiative myself. And then also I got into the sports industry at a time when it was the worst possible time to get into the sports industry. So I graduated in May. We were in the thick of the coronavirus. All sports leagues were shut down. So there weren't many people hiring. So I'm very grateful to be where I am today. And then lastly, all of my experiences throughout university, regrettably, were unpaid. So I really had to kind of pay my dues and get through there.
100%. Like that's sort of been, what we've been hearing for some upper level roles. Like I'm in the process of applying for internships now through my program, but mostly all of them are unpaid. And it's again, it seems to be the nature of the industry, but with a finite amount of jobs available, you have to cut your teeth. You have to cut your teeth somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
I totally agree, and I've heard the concept of paying your dues many times from many professionals and many students alike as you enter the industry. And you mentioned briefly just about your experience being unpaid. It's a facet of the industry, right? Wherever it's going in the future with internships and whatever people's opinions on that are. The fact of the matter is, you have to work your way to where you are. So it's great, and it's a kudos to you on that end. Now, just going back to your experience, you went to McGill for strategic management and finance, but you ended up taking an analytics role for the Martlets women's hockey team during your time there. What was the main motive that attracted you to get involved with McGill sports? And I believe you did it with a mutual friend of ours as well, if I'm correct, Tommy.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So if I'm being totally honest, this came at a time right after I was on exchange, and so classic being on exchange, you're kind of reminiscing on life and you're living the good life and you're traveling and doing all those great things. And it kind of gave me the time to ponder and realize that I want to do something that I enjoy. I don't want to just go to a 9 to 5 to pay the bills. That's going to be the majority of your life. So you better make sure that you enjoy it. And then I realized, like, okay, sports is kind of where my passion lies right now. And I hadn't done enough, in my opinion, to be set up to land a career in sports after graduation. And so I basically just started looking at all the possible avenues to get any experience. When I say any experience, though, I want to highlight that there's a really good book out there. It's called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay, a clinical psychologist. And she talks about basically how important your 20s are. And when I say I wanted to get any experience, I didn't want to be underemployed. And so the
Right.
difference there is that I didn't want to have just a job in sports to say that I was in sports, like being I don't know, maybe like just like a score clock at a game or something. It's good experience not hitting it, but I wanted to make sure that what I did was going to help me get to that next stage. And so working for the McGill Martlets was kind of that first opportunity. And in the book, actually, they talk about weak ties as well. And weak ties, they say, are one of the things that help most people progress through the career. Whereas relying on your close network often doesn't actually result in too much, just because you're so similar. You have the same connections, you have the same interests, so you don't broaden your horizons enough. And it's really those people that but you're not maybe super close with, maybe you don't talk with all the time. It's those people that help you make those moves. And luckily for me, one of those weak ties at the time was our friend Tom Cote Miller, and I reached out to him, and that's how I joined the McGill hockey team, because he was going on exchange, and so an opportunity, everything kind of lined up. But to be honest, I'd be lying if I said that I wanted to join the Martlets at the beginning because I wanted to learn from the coach who was like an Olympic coach and had won medals and all of that. Like that fun stuff or that fancy stuff was really more afterwards. In hindsight, joining the Martlets was one of the best things I ever did. If I look back so far, it's like one of the few things where I'd say like this has to stay part of my path. The amount that I learned from them was incredible. But at the start, it was just to find work or experience that I could actually gain something from, and that would help me take that next step.
100%. And it's funny how you say you were just trying to get just trying to land a job just for work at the start, but all of a sudden you're going through the role, and then you find that de facto aha moment where you actually find your niche, find something to focus on, and hammer that home during your studies. It doesn't happen. And sometimes it happens when you least expect it. So fair play to you for taking that role, taking that opportunity, and making the most of it with quite a good hockey program. I believe the Martlets have got quite the roster of alumni. I think there's been a couple who have gone on to play to be with the Canadian national team, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, you're bang on. I mean, there's right now we got Mila Zidau, there's Kim St. Pierre in the past, the list goes on.
Saint
Um,
Pierre. Saint
yeah,
Pierre. That's a throwback name, I tell you.
yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And what you were saying about how it kind of comes together, I mean, to be honest, timing was perfect. When I reached out to him, he happened to be going on exchange. They needed someone to fill in. And so it just all worked out. This being said, though, I do want to highlight the importance that kind of thinking ahead and laying foundation ahead of time, how important it is. I had actually reached out to him when he started with the team like 2 years prior, like, hey, like, are there any opportunities with the team? Do you know,
Right.
even with other teams? At the time, there wasn't. But so then when he was getting to this point where he was going to have to go on exchange and they needed some support, and then I happened to reach out, that connection was already there, you know? And so he knew that, okay, this guy reaching out to me, it's not like a one-off thing where suddenly in the moment he's interested. He already knew that 2 years ago I had been thinking about this. And so that definitely helped, because at the end of the day, there was quite a bit of work to do and it was something that had to be taken seriously. And so we didn't want to just throw anybody in there.
100%. Just speaks to the value of connections, and how if it's the right place and the right time, they can pay off in spades. And going in a totally different direction here, a unique aspect of your undergrad was that you went on exchange to Shantou University in China back in 2018. What was that like to travel many time zones away and experience something completely out of your comfort zone? Shout out to the show's theme, shameless plug.
Yeah, that's another good one. I mean, to be honest, it was really out of my comfort zone. I got accepted to this program or to this exchange on a special program 3 months before I left. So it was kind of like they told me, "All right, do you want to go to China?" And I was like, "All right, let's do it." And so it was definitely out of the blue. I had no base of Mandarin whatsoever at the time, and I kind of saw an exchange as an opportunity. Um, so many people go to somewhere where they'd feel comfortable. No shot to Australia. I want to go there so badly. I love it. But at the end of the day, it's another Commonwealth country. They speak the same language as us. It's pretty straightforward. And so to me, an exchange was an opportunity where I can go somewhere where I'm entirely out of my comfort zone and I have the school backing me up. So I got there. They helped set up my visa. They helped me get my bank account set up. They had a little student following me around to help with the translations. That was massive. Whereas in hindsight, if you go to one of these countries where maybe you don't speak the language or their culture is entirely different, if you just go on your own vacation, it might not be as easy to integrate and actually take in the culture because there's so much that you have to do yourself. And so
Right.
I knew from the start that if I was going on exchange, I wanted to go somewhere where I was going to push myself and I was going to learn. And I was going to differentiate myself because I find so often that exchanges on a resume, it's too easy for it to look like it was just a joyride where you were just kind of partying and traveling and having a great time. Whereas if you can mix it up a little bit, it's a way for you to stand out. It's a way for people to see that you've been somewhere and it doesn't just fly under the radar. Um, and I think what this highlights is that even for myself getting into sports, I didn't need a resume that was entirely sports focused. And we can get into it later, but um, I never had like an official internship in sports. Like I was
Mhm.
working with the Martlets, but that was kind of a continuous thing for 2 years. And then otherwise it was just like self-involvement with volunteering or at McGill. And I didn't have like an internship with a team or a club or anything like that. But the experiences I had were enough to set me apart and kind of give me that spin. I had sports on one side and then I had these unique experiences. And together, I think when these companies were getting all these applicants, I think it helps to kind of differentiate yourself a little bit and stand out from the crowd.
I love that. As a huge proponent for going on exchange, I completely back everything you said there. I think going on exchange when you are a student and you have the opportunity to, especially if the stars align and the costs align and it could happen, it's definitely something that I want to push every student to kind of take advantage of. You referenced before about living in your 20s. I do think this is a huge time period, for young adults as they kind of are growing and going into the professional landscape to also kind of have some fun because at the end of the day, who knows, 5, 6 years from now, we are going to be full-time employees. We're going to be living our lives, right, in whatever way, whatever shape that looks.
Yeah.
So, I love that you're honing in on these other experiences. And again, as somebody who's gone exchange as well, obviously not as far as you, but somebody who's gone exchange as well, I'm all for that experience always. And you know, that's something that I hope students could take away right now, that these exchange experiences, one, are amazing experiences to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And then two, it's what you make of it as well while you're there. You know, whether you
Definitely.
get involved, if you travel or not, whatever you do, representing obviously yourself, representing your university, those are two big things when you're going on exchange. So I love that answer on your end, man.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing to highlight is that then, given where I had gone, the school year was totally different from ours back home. Like, we were delayed a couple months. It meant that that whole summer I wasn't able to have a job, have an internship. And even though in the moment when you're kind of going through that, because you see your friends that are getting these big internships, maybe it's in sports, maybe it's in something else, it can cause a little bit of stress.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough how much it doesn't matter to miss out on one summer of an internship. You know, what I gained through that internship and being abroad and traveling was invaluable. And you can do your own things to kind of build that resume. When I was on exchange at that little school, like, we created like a little clothing company, and that was kind of like my side project. So if people do call me out in an interview for not having done something that summer, I still have side projects that I worked on that I can bring up. But that's never happened. To be honest, it's these small things where you're building this like identity capital. It's another thing that they talk about in that book I made reference to, where it's, you're basically putting together all these different parts as you're growing up, and that together kind of makes the currency, if you will, that you try and buy your next job with. And so it just so happens that I went on exchange in China. Now we have the Beijing Olympics coming up, and that did play a factor, that I did have a little bit of a base of Mandarin. And so now it has made the transition and my candidacy a lot more appealing, if you will.
100%. And, you know, like, and, you know, you make a good point when, you know, you're talking about people getting all these big internships. Meanwhile, you're on the side. And, you know, there are people like that, whether they're on exchange or whether they're not. And, you know, I think the pressure is sort of amplified because the job market is still still in the rebounding stages, obviously due to COVID. But you know, I'm sort of gonna take a phrase that, you know, that's used in long distance running, and that's run your own race. You can't control what you can't be too focused on this person that's ahead of you. You can't be focused on the other person that's ahead of you. All you should be focused on is yourself. Like, as long as you have goals, as long as you have a rough path to get to somewhere, and you know, it's probably going to change. It's probably not going to be perfect, but you know, that's okay. But you know, that's okay. That's okay. And, you know, and especially, and, you know, since stress and mental health are a big issue, I think just that concept is so important this year and on to next.
Definitely. And you kind of bring up a great point about how run your own race, because when I would go to sports management conferences and you had speakers there, I kind of came at it with a different lens. I wasn't looking to network with the people there. And I also wasn't looking too much to hear how they got to their role, because how they got to their role, honestly, it differs for every single person.
Right.
Like, if I look at my colleagues at work, there are few who came from that typical sports background. Some of them like studied biology and like totally out of left field, you know? So at these sports conferences, I was really looking to hear what their day-to-day entailed. What were the jobs that are out there? Because I had no idea at the end of the day. You talk to your friends and they say they want to work in sports. Everybody says they want to be the GM, but what are the other jobs, you know? And so that's what I mean. It's like there are so many different paths that you can hear what someone does. It might inspire you. It might give you some confidence if you see that they've been in a similar situation to you, and it kind of gives you hope that you can make it. But at the end of the day, kind of run your own race, like you said. I mean, for myself, one of my big volunteering gigs, if you will, right after exchange, so the same time that I joined the McGill Martlets hockey program, was I went out to the World Junior Hockey Championship in Vancouver. And so I was just a volunteer, so that means that I had to pay for my flight from Montreal to Vancouver, and then I had to pay for my lodging when I was there for those 2 weeks over Christmas. So it's a pretty big ask to volunteer, you know? Does it seem crazy? Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, for me, it was such a highlight. I mean, I was Christmas morning up at 5 a.m. at Rogers Place, and then one day I had to like sleep in the Canucks locker room overnight because we had an early practice. Like, you make it what your own, you know? Everybody's got their own story, and so even though it was unpaid and I was actually paying for it, it panned out in the long run.
Two things I want to make reference to here before we move on. Obviously, that quick story you kind of said about, you paying your way to go all the way to Vancouver, it shows dedication, first things first, and it shows, you want to perfect your craft and you want to do what needs to be done, and you also want to enjoy that experience. At the end of the day, we are in a society where, you need to pay for stuff. That's kind of the general deal is goods and services for money. You kind of disregarded that for the moment, and you said, listen, for me, this is worth whatever it costs to get out there and to get that experience and to be a part of something that's great. Also, one thing that you kind of referenced maybe a couple minutes ago, that if Will can have a quick story time, do I have permission to tell a quick story?
Go for it.
So,
Go for it.
Roddy mentioned business conference, and I want to tell a quick story about, first off, context. I know Roddy for probably 5 years now at this point. We met through some mutual friends who he went to high school with, who I ended up going to CEGEP with. And that's how we met. And we kind of met through playing fantasy hockey, and I've been involved with his league for multiple years now. This is the first year that my team's actually, I think, above 500 at a certain point. So shout out to me on that end. It's tough. It's a 14-man league, so it's really tough. And yeah, Rod's having the hottest year. Yeah, we're dedicated. In either case, 2 years ago, in my first year at Brock, I took a bunch of my friends from my floor, a bunch of SPMA students. We went road trip down to Montreal, attend the John Molson conference 2 years ago. And it was, an amazing opportunity. We're all kind of first year students. We want to get involved. We want to see these amazing speakers. John Molson did a great job at putting some speakers there. And I run into Roddy there. And I think we had spoken maybe a couple days before that we were both going to be there. Either way, I knew I was going to see him there. And I meet up with him. I introduce him to everybody. And we start going to these events and whatnot. And at a certain point, we're all just, everyone's in a big hallway. Everyone's kind of just mingling. At a certain point, Roddy goes to me and he's like, is this the first time we've ever met? And I'm like, is it? So it didn't never click to me, because I've gotten to know him really well, over 3 years when you're messaging somebody with trades and, you're having chats about hockey and whatnot. So I considered him a friend, and the fact that I've gotten to know him. And then it hits me that this is the first time I've ever met this guy in person. Yeah. Little crazy story. And I mean, it speaks to the fact that you can kind of develop a relationship over Zoom or over Facebook Messenger. We've definitely seen that in the past year, that, you could develop these friendships and these connections and whatnot over Zoom, having Zoom interviews and Zoom meetings and whatnot. Just a quick story I wanted to tell.
And honestly, it's a perfect example of like those weak ties I was telling you guys about at the start. Like, to start, you and me we had never met in person, and it was just through friends and things like that. And now here you've reached out to me for this podcast, and that's kind of how it goes, But just to touch on your point before that, where you're talking about, going, like, paying your dues, the unpaid internships, I don't really have a view on them. There's the pros and the cons. But what is certain is that I do think it will be changing, just given that unpaid internships can limit the talent pool significantly. And limit the diversity of the candidates you're getting.
100%.
And like with the topics we've been talking about how, like, I flew out west and then the unpaid internships, don't get it wrong that, like, you don't have to do all those sacrifices and pay out of your own pocket for that to happen. All of my unpaid internships were covered by the university. So maybe they were abroad and it was the university that was paying for my flights, my lodging. And so all I'm saying is that, like, look into these options, like, see what your university is offering. There's so many programs out there where they can cover you. My exchange was covered by the university too. And so all these experiences, you don't got to pay an arm and a leg for it. People are out there to try and help you, and make sure that you do your research and look into it.
Now, Brock does a great job integrating having an internship into their program. It's an option for students to spend a semester as an intern. I spent last summer doing my internship for the program. Amazing experience, kind of like you said. So completely agree. See what's out there, see what's available, and whatnot. I do want to take what you said about internship and do a little segue quickly, as I love me a good segue. So after your internship with the COC, you've landed your current role as coordinator of game ops, where you've led the transportation program for both Tokyo 2020, which unfortunately is not happened due to COVID, and then Beijing, looking forward to next year in 2022. How has your role evolved, all given the fact that you also started when COVID kind of started, and how has that particularly thrown a wrench in the plans for these games?
Yeah, well, oh man, so many points there. So I started off as an assistant, and I've only taken on the transpo kind of silo, if you will, and program just before the new year. And so the biggest difficulty because we do have Tokyo coming up this summer, like it got postponed, but it's still happening this summer. And then we have Beijing 6 months later. And so the biggest wrench that COVID has thrown into our plans is the fact that we have these back-to-back Olympics 6 months apart. I mean, typically we have a year and a half to 2.5 years between Olympic Games, depending if it's summer or winter. So that gives you a lot more flexibility and freedom when you're planning for these games. And so that was the first time where they're going to be 6 months apart and we're planning them simultaneously. So one meeting I'm talking about Tokyo, the next one I'm talking about Beijing, and you're kind of flipping that switch. In terms of like COVID impacts specifically, I kind of laugh all the time because I'm like, to me, it's normal. I started in this environment. I've never been in the office since I started full time.
Yeah.
And so I'm lucky that these things about adding COVID countermeasures to vehicles, distancing, all of this is just part of the transportation program. I haven't known anything different, So
right.
It's kind of the benefit you have when you're coming in fresh-faced out of university. But I mean, yeah, like public transport, we won't be able to use that. There's gonna be fewer team members, different accreditations. That all affects our plans at games. And so the biggest thing is just trying to manage these back-to-back games.
100%.
So
yeah,
I guess spin zone, technically, if the world were to return at any point to a certain sense of normal, right? Pre-COVID, that's actually going to be the wrench for you, instead of COVID being the wrench for. If you spin that around, right? You're basically saying you started here where other people had to adjust, and now you're going to have to adjust when they're going back.
I suppose, yeah. I'm hoping that it'll be a little bit easier because I'll just be removing some of these frills that I've had to add to the program. Like if I'm thinking about dividers and vehicles, things like that, I'll be able to remove that from my little list of to-do. So hopefully it won't be too much more complicated. But definitely, honestly, the fact that regular games, you have more people, there's more movement. You may have heard that recently international spectators won't be allowed to attend the Tokyo Olympics. So that means that we have less friends, less family, less people overall that are coming as we've tried to minimize the size of our team. And so a regular games, there's gonna be a lot more movement, a lot more people. That's definitely gonna be more difficult for me.
100%. And you mentioned less flexibility. That's probably the biggest wrench. Like you talk about a monumentous task, being preparing for transportation in Tokyo, and then like in terms of like games time, if you're going by games time, you don't even get to reset. It's like, okay, boom, onto Beijing. It's that quick. And people may not realize that, but we're going to come up to Tokyo quick, and that's going to go, and then Beijing is going to come up even quicker. So so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but hopefully there's not any other curveballs that come your way once both those games go up. A common theme throughout your experience so far is getting involved early, and often that's sort of the case for people who want to be in the sports industry. Other than your role with the Martlets, did you do anything else to get your foot into the door while at school? And how do you think getting involved with both sports at McGill and securing internships for postgraduates has helped set yourself apart from other recent grads vying for jobs?
Yeah, it's great that you said kind of starting off early. I definitely can't stress that enough. you don't want to be scrambling in your last semester, picking up an odd job or an odd experience to just kind of throw it onto your resume when you're applying for jobs, because like we said, there's so many people applying, and if you do get to that interview stage, they're going to ask you for the details and you're going to want to be able to deliver on that. So it's starting off early. The other big thing which helped me um, gain experience in the industry and just knowledge overall was that same time when I got back from exchange from China, when I reached out to the McGill Martlets, when I did the World Junior Championship in Vancouver, I also joined the McGill Sports Management Club, which we're nowhere near as big as a lot of the others in Canada. We're kind of just starting off. And so that first year, I was just in charge of all speaker relations, and that was fantastic. I mean, you're just kind of grinding on LinkedIn and working connections and trying to reach out to people. And I think that there's the biggest value is in really organizing those events, attending it. Like I said, I never saw it as a networking opportunity. People see so many kids. There are limited jobs. I don't think that that's necessarily always the moment. There's the odd case where you might get your job from attending one of these events, but I think it's really to learn what the roles out there are. So organizing it to me was where I could gain a tremendous amount of experience. And then um, the year after I was director of speaker relations, I took on the executive director role, and so that was phenomenal. Sadly, the conference got canceled because of COVID, but it's really in that situation where you're gaining the hands-on experience that you'll be able to talk about, and that'll have material value during an interview, where you can go on and you can elaborate and you can explain. But the other thing I want to highlight is that don't get yourself down if you don't have that much sports specific experience. Definitely you need a little bit. It's not a requirement for the jobs, but they like to see that you have interest in the industry and experience. But like I said, I didn't have one internship in sports. So my internship before graduation, so it was kind of like my last one, was actually as a social impact consultant in South Africa. No relation to sports whatsoever. But come my interview with the COC, for actually my internship there, which was kind of like out of left field. So um, the South Africa one wasn't my last one. But anyways, when they asked me about, listen, we're going to work with a lot of national sports organizations. Not all of them have as many means. Some of them only have a couple employees, whereas you have Hockey Canada who has hundreds. Do you have any experience kind of working with people who have less and things like that? And suddenly I'm drawing on my experience that has no relation to sports about working in townships in South Africa. And we spoke about that for 10, 15 minutes because it wasn't something that was common, you know? I had a lot to go on about it. Then they asked me about, they had a program, the Women Emerging Leaders Development Program, I think it's called. And so they asked me if I had any experience in kind of that realm, if it was something that spoke to me. And I was like, okay, yeah, listen, I'm currently working with the McGill Martlets. And so having joined them, I have a true appreciation of women's sports, elevating women's sports, and making sure that we can set up leagues and aspirations for them down the road, where they can use it, have it as a career. And so suddenly here I was drawing on these experiences from the past for their questions, which you're kind of just piecing it together from all your past experiences. And so it doesn't necessarily have to come from sports. And I think that if all of your experiences are not solely from sports, it's actually beneficial because it helps you stand out and makes you a little bit more memorable.
I mean, just a couple things obviously to highlight what you said. First things first is not always needing any experience in sport. I think you bring up a great point in terms of, wherever students want to end up. Let's say student A wants to end up, working in professional hockey. Your entire life is up for question in terms of experience. You can draw on your job, working as a retail associate at Canadian Tire, if that helps, in the interview question, right? And you don't particularly need sport experience to help with certain situations. A lot of entry-level jobs are potentially in ticket sales, and for that you just need great customer service, great customer relations, and you know how to sell. So you can really draw on, creating relationships, whether it's making friends through school or whether it's, working a part-time job in retail, whatever it may be, to help you land that job. So that's something I first want to highlight that I think is great. That you kind of mentioned that, you don't really even need sports if you want to get in. At the end of the day, obviously, to be driven is something that's fantastic. And I see the drive in you right now, and I hear the drive in you from what you've been saying. What I also want to point out really quickly is that you and I are the same age. So we're, are you 24, 23, whatever it is, mid 20s at this point. And you've been able to say that you have lived a full life so far. in terms of what you experienced and where you've been and what you've done. And that's fantastic. And that in and amongst itself is an amazing accomplishment. To go literally travel to other parts of the world and to do stuff with, other cultures and to immerse yourself there and then to come back and to start working towards your career in where you want to be is fantastic. So I guess I'll segue that into asking, given everything that you've experienced so far, from school to traveling to work to other experiences and everything in between, how do you take all of this in as you make this transition, or as you've made and you continue to make this transition to working full-time in sports? And how do you kind of take your experience and build your professionalism and build yourself as a professional as you go on to your future?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good one. It's tough to pinpoint a couple things. I feel like it all comes together and forms one nice picture at the very end, and it looks like that's how it was planned, but it really wasn't. It comes back to what I was kind of harping on before about having your own path and doing the things that you're interested in doing. You mentioned it, like you only have one life, and so make sure that you're kind of enjoying it now, but doing the moves that are going to set you up for later. And so for myself, it was, I had the option to do my internship abroad, and I took that. No relation to sport, but I knew I was going to gain a lot from that. And it's such a competitive industry that if you can set yourself apart in whatever little way it is, take it and run. And especially look out for opportunities that are organized by others. I mean, universities offer all kinds of programs and support, and make sure to take those and run with it. Yeah, and all those experiences, they come up big, and when you're interviewing and just networking and talking, like if you have a wide breadth of knowledge, it goes a long way. Because at the end of the day, these people they're going to be your colleagues, they're going to be working with you, and like we were saying, like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, for 40 years of your life, it's a long time. So make sure that you're just not too one-dimensional. I've always had this internal debate about whether it's good to specialize or if it's good to kind of have a broad breadth of knowledge. I still haven't come down on an answer on that yet. Still trying to figure it out, but I think it's still important to have a wide breadth of experiences.
100%.
Well, I will say you're still young and you're learning, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
We all grow.
definitely.
We all
Definitely.
evolve. So.
Yeah, like all of us on this on this episode, and and a good chunk of people listening to this are still young, and there's still lots of opportunity to be a lifelong learner, keep developing your niches, and learn some different things about yourself. If you choose to specialize, go for it. But if you want to go for a broad set of skills, then that's totally fine as well. And like I said before, it's all about running your own race. As we bring this show to a close here, Rod, we like to, as is tradition on the SPMA Council podcast, we like to give the guest an open floor here to say what's on their mind. Maybe there's some recent events that you want to talk about, or just make it as an excuse to shoot the breeze with us a while longer. So, Rod, thanks again for joining, and the floor is yours.
Oh, holy smokes! I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't part of your.
That's that. And we got you. I think we've been doing this from the beginning, right? A little guest sign off. That's the old 12-6 curveball on 0-2 count that freezes the batter in the box, forces them to think.
Yeah. Holy smokes. Oh man, yeah. Now I feel like I'm an interview, and they asked me a question. I'm trying to come up with something quick here on the spot.
No worries.
I will say, if you want a second to think, I'll jump in quickly and say one thing. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but this will be my final episode. So I'm kind of moving on past, my studies at Brock and moving on to my future. It's kind of crazy. I was speaking about this with Will beforehand, that this started, in Dr. Percy Spence's office with an interview. And a couple months later, I'm meeting Will in downtown Toronto, and we're interviewing Daniel Henry from LSD, and it's crazy.
In the Air Canada Center, not a big deal.
In the Air Canada Center, not a big deal. And to see where the podcast has evolved and to see, what the team's accomplished this year, my biggest kudos go out to Will, to Neville, to Evan for what they've accomplished. They have really, exemplified the theme of this podcast this year, is getting out of your comfort zone, being online and being forced to adapt to a new environment in terms of still putting out content. So a huge kudos goes out to the team, Will, Evan, and Neville, for an amazing job. And then a little selfishly, I wanted to kind of bring on somebody who I know, a friend of mine from back home, for my final episode, and to have a conversation, just about sports and about working in sports. So a huge thank you goes to you, Roddy, for coming on the podcast today. And we've all really appreciated your insights. And I will now cede my time, and the floor is yours for the final goodbye here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing me on, man. I mean, if ever anybody wants to reach out, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or anything. I was probably spitting my words at a couple of moments and going in circles. So if ever anybody has any questions, I can be a little bit more clear. But honestly, like, what you guys are doing is so impressive. It often gets overlooked how tough it is to manage these kind of initiatives when you're a student. It takes so much more work than you see on the surface.
Oh yeah.
And I'm impressed by what you guys are doing here. I know we tried to even just start when I was at McGill, like a newsletter, and I think we made it through 3 months. We had like 3 interviews and it just fizzled off. And so the fact that you guys are on your second season, wrapping it up, 20 episodes, huge kudos to you guys. And it's a prime example of like those small initiatives that if you can get yourself involved in, it's going to pay dividends in the long run. Because you don't know exactly what your path is going to be in the long run, where you're going to end up, and what opportunities are going to open. Myself, I've always had a passion for sustainability and social development and things like that. And so my past internships in that, maybe one day something's going to open up in sports and I'll be able to have that experience to go into it, and so honestly, I don't know if I have much more to say. But it's to not be afraid to just go after it. I ended up putting all my eggs in one basket after exchange and saying sports management was what I wanted to work in afterwards. And I got involved as much as I could, and just be confident in yourself, because you hear all these people that want to work in sports. Very few are taking those concrete steps to actually make it happen. And so just commit and you'd be shocked.
100%. Rod, that's a great way to end off the episode. We thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, man.